So we're going to start this little stats video with some voter information. First we have votes per matchup. What I've done here is create a row for each individual matchup throughout the tournament. With 58 movies in a single elimination tournament, only one can be a winner, and that means there are 57 losers, meaning that there are 57 matchups. But I've added an additional 58th matchup for the battle for third place. So therefore, we have a total of 58 rows with voter information. Now each row indicates the week that the matchup was up for voting, as well as the round. So 1A would be the first round in Class A. The W indicates the number of votes for the winner of that matchup, the L indicates the number of votes for the loser, and TOT is total. It's simply the sum of the winning and losing votes, the total number of votes for that matchup. I don't have the actual film names listed out here, but you can easily go to any of these tabs to see the brackets for each class and verify that these numbers are correct. So as you can see, for the most part, we have most total votes for each matchup in like the mid to low teens, some dipping below 10. Once we get around to week 9, though, we see quite a bit of a spike. This 30 was Beauty and the Beast versus Emperor's New Groove. Kind of the game changer for this tournament, if you've been paying attention. But yeah, for the most part, kind of staying around in the teens, sometimes going into the 20s, sometimes dipping a little bit lower, but always fluctuating around there. Now I've added these two average categories. So average here indicates the average number of votes for every single matchup, and that turns out to be 19. And that might not make a whole lot of sense considering that everything we see here is low to mid-teens with a few exceptions. But let's not forget, the two matchups for the final round for third place and the championship, they are well above what we've seen throughout the rest of the tournament, 93 and 149 respectively. Keep in mind, nothing else received anything higher than 30. So because these two are obvious outliers, I've also included a stat for the average number of votes without these finals, so the 56 matchups that came before it. And there we have a much more reasonable estimate of 15.36 votes per matchup. Yeah, mid-teens, we kind of see that here, and yeah, that makes a lot more sense than 19. And this is why we have to consider outliers when doing statistical analysis. Moving on over here, I've also included statistics for the total number of votes per week. So for each week, I've included the total number of votes as well as the average number of votes per matchup. Weeks 1 through 5 and 7 only had 3 matchups. Weeks 6 and 8 through 15 all had 4 matchups. 16 and 17 were the semifinals and finals respectively, so they only had 2. And I've also included a visual here which plots the average votes per matchup for each week. As you can see, we start out in the low to mid-teens, a bit of a rise as we go along, but then dropping the next few weeks. Rising a bit more with week 6, steadily falling up to week 8, and then we get to week 9 with this sharp rise to 25.5. Now this was the week that I decided to expand my voter base to include my Facebook groups, so that included a much wider number of people to submit their votes, and that's why we have that big explosion here. I'm assuming a lot of them just didn't return for later ones, or whether it be because the matchups weren't that interesting or they just didn't pay attention after the first week, because we see a drop off to around 15 again. This remains pretty steady throughout the rest of the round 2 votes. Staying pretty steady around the mid-teens, steadily rising as we get to the Elite 8 and then the Final 4, and then of course with the final absolutely shooting up with the 2 matchups getting an average of 121. I think this is a good representation of why outliers are important to consider. Okay, so some more stats for voting. So what we have here is the total number of votes per film. Now, what I have in each row, we have the film, and then we have columns 1 through 6. These values indicate the number of votes that the films got in their respective rounds. If they got eliminated in a certain round, I've marked that with a red filling. And the 4 movies that made it to the final 4 and therefore had information for rounds 5 and 6, I have indicated these in blue. So with that being said, I also almost forgot. The films that got buys, I put X's in round 1 to indicate that they made it past round 1 but didn't receive any votes, so the first round will not be counted when we go through the average. Now scrolling over here, we have the total number of votes for each film as well as the average. I've included stats that include the final and stats that do not include the final because, again, the final is such an outlier that it heavily skews the films that made it that far. Let's look at Emperor's New Groove, for example. It received 157 votes with the final, but if you take away round 6, it only receives 77. Yeah, it received more votes in the final round than all 5 previous combined. Pretty insane, huh? So, the statistic that means the most to me is the average number of votes without the final, because it gets rid of that outlier factor and everything else is fairly consistent, so we can see which films did in fact receive the most votes. And as we can see, The Emperor's New Groove, it consistently received more votes than any other movie. It received the most votes in round 1 with 15. It received 20 votes in round 2. Rounds 3 and 4 were a bit lower, but it really bounced back in round 5 with 18. Lion King did not do as well as Emperor's New Groove in terms of total votership, but it still did better than most of the rest of the crowd. Early onset voting was pretty high with 15, and it remains steadily around that low 10s. We can actually see Mulan, which did not make it to the final 4, also received 12 3/4 votes on average. And I suppose it makes sense that the film to knock it out was also the only film to get more votes on average. And keep in mind, Mulan and Emperor's New Groove went to a tiebreaker, which The Emperor's New Groove won. So who's to say how Mulan would have done in terms of voting had it made it further into the tournament? Now, of course, we do have some films that didn't receive any votes. It's worth noting that all the movies that received no votes got eliminated in the first round. And any film that made it past the first round received at least 1 vote in all of their other matchups. So we have The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, Frozen 2, Fun and Fancy Free, The Black Cauldron, Saludos Amigos, and Dinosaur. These films were not popular at all. I can understand most of these not getting votes. I mean, Dinosaur, it went up against Cinderella, Saludos Amigos against Little Mermaid, Ichabod and Mr. Toad went up against Emperor's New Groove. That really should have been the early sign that Emperor's New Groove was going to do great things. I am a little bit surprised, though, that Frozen 2 didn't get any votes. I know it does have its share of fans, and it went up against Hercules, which isn't exactly the most popular Disney movie out there, so I would have thought Frozen 2 would have gotten at least 1 vote, but apparently not. And before moving on, the last thing I want to point out is the film that got knocked out in the first round but received more votes than others that got knocked out in the first round was Lady and the Tramp. It received 6 votes in the first round, but still didn't make it past that. It actually lost to the 12-seed Treasure Planet, which was the first real upset of this tournament. And this is something that we'll be coming back to a little bit later, so just put a pin in that for now. Yeah, and we can see that Fantasia, it's in the top half for total votes received, but not by a whole lot. I think it's only number 18. Didn't even receive 9 votes per matchup. And that's kind of fascinating, considering that not only is this highly regarded as Disney's masterpiece, but did in fact make it to the finals. But if you go through the brackets, each of its matchups were fairly close. It beat Princess and the Frog by only 2 votes, 10-8. It beat 101 Dalmatians 7-4, so only a margin of 3. And it beat out Cinderella by a margin of 1. So even though Fantasia kept on winning, it was never a sure thing. Okay, and finally we have votes per class. So I've created a bunch of different charts that have this same format. The numbers in each row and letters in each column. The numbers indicate the class, and the numbers indicate the seed, and the columns indicate the class. So this chart right here is just a reference for all the other charts. For example, we have Beauty and the Beast in 1A, and if we go over to the finishing round, this 2 refers to Beauty and the Beast. Specifically, it refers to the round in which Beauty and the Beast got knocked out in, which was round 2. So we can see here how each round seed did on average. So we can see that the 1 seeds did the best on average, getting eliminated in round 4, which is amazing because none of them actually got eliminated in round 4, but that's what it averaged out to. We can actually see that Class 4 did the second best in terms of overall performance. They all made it to round 3 at the very least, but we can see that most of them got eliminated in that round, with only 4C, which was Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, making it to the Elite 8 and losing. Class 7 is also another interesting case because it's a lot higher than you might expect. 2 of them made it to the Elite 8 round, Mulan and Lilo and Stitch. But unfortunately, the average is dragged down by the fact that Winnie the Pooh 2011 got knocked out in the first round, and Great Mouse Detective got knocked out in round 2. And then, of course, there's the 9 seed. All of them got knocked out in the first round, except for 9A, Emperor's New Groove. There were only 6 rounds, but I gave Emperor's New Groove a 7 to indicate that it won round 6. The 6 here indicates that Lion King made it to the finals and lost. Notice that Class 6 is the lowest seed where every film made it to the next round. And consequently, 11 is the highest seed where all the films got knocked out in the first round. Yeah, and the 12 seeds actually had a couple making it past the first round. Treasure Planet and Fantasia 2000. That's just really cool. Really cool to see. Moving on to the next chart, we have the total number of votes for each film. In this case, I am counting the final round. I don't think it would be fair in this case to leave those out. So we can see that on average, the 1 seeds had the most votes. That makes sense because they made it the furthest on average. The second highest is Class 9. Some very low outcomes, since most of these got knocked out in the first round. Then, of course, you have Emperor's New Groove getting 157 total. That's higher than any other movie by far. That's honestly just hilarious to me. This one outlier just completely skews the average to be higher than everything else. The two classes with the lowest number of votes were 13 and 15, averaging 1.5 votes per matchup. Amazingly, the 14 seed is not the lowest, even though it had two movies, Saludos Amigos and Dinosaur, not get a single vote. And the 15 seeds, all of them got at least one. And then finally, we have the stats for average votes. So the class that got the highest average was, of course, Class 1, 13.75 was the average of the average. So Class 6 actually comes in second place. Wreck-It Ralph received 12 votes on average, Frozen 6.5, Tangled 9 on average, and Hercules 10 1/3. This actually puts it well ahead of Class 2 and even Class 9, which had Emperor's New Groove skewing the statistics. Once again, 13 and 15 at the lowest on average. Nothing really special there. And yeah, that basically does it for voting statistics. Now let's get on to performance stats. So I decided to rank the performance of the movies in Mouse Madness using two factors. The first being how far into the tournament the movie made it, and two, the relative performance of the movies that knocked them out. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, let's take two movies for example, Ichabod and Mr. Toad and Fun and Fancy Free. Both of these movies got knocked out in the very first round. In fact, both of them didn't receive a single vote. However, Ichabod and Mr. Toad got knocked out by The Emperor's New Groove, which went on to win the entire tournament. Meanwhile, Fun and Fancy Free got eliminated by Big Hero 6, and Big Hero 6 got knocked out in the very next round. So given that information, you would say that Ichabod and Mr. Toad's loss was more understandable and more justifiable than Fun and Fancy Free's. And with the way that I plan on scoring the performance, Ichabod and Mr. Toad would have technically performed better than Fun and Fancy Free because the movie that knocked it out performed better. So I'm using this logic to provide a raw score, and the higher the score, the better the performance. Going into general details of how this works would be too complicated, so instead I'm going to demonstrate with the following three movies: Zootopia, Wreck-It Ralph, and Bolt. So we're going to score Zootopia first. Now, did Zootopia win round 1? Yes, it did. So instead of a 0, we're going to put a 1. Note that 1s represent wins and 0s represent losses. Did Zootopia win round 2? Yes, it did. So we put a 1 there. Did Zootopia win round 3? No, it got knocked out. So we move on to round 4, focusing on the movie that knocked out Zootopia, which is Aladdin. Did Aladdin win round 4? Yes, it did. So we put a 1 there. Did Aladdin win round 5, the Final Four semifinal? No, it did not. So we put a 0 in 5, and Aladdin moved to the battle for 3rd place. Did Aladdin win that battle? Yes, it did. So we put a 1 in 6. So, given the information in these columns, we can provide a raw score for performance. First, we converted this to a binary number, which is basically just taking these values and putting them in a single string. Then in the decimal score, we converted it to base 10, or counting numbers. So Zootopia's performance score is 110101. Converted to decimal, that's 53. We're going to do the same thing with Wreck-It Ralph. Did Wreck-It Ralph win round 1? Yes, it did. Did it win round 2? No, it didn't. It got knocked out by The Little Mermaid. Did The Little Mermaid win round 3? No, it got knocked out by Mulan. Did Mulan win round 4? No, it didn't. It lost to The Emperor's New Groove. Did Emperor's New Groove win round 5? Yes, it did, and it went on to the finals. Did it win the finals? Yes, it did. Using the same logic as Zootopia, the raw score for Wreck-It Ralph is 35. So comparatively, Zootopia did better than Wreck-It Ralph. And intuitively, that makes sense. Wreck-It Ralph got knocked out in round 2, Zootopia got knocked out in round 3. And we're going to do this one more time to really have it sink in with Bolt. Bolt got eliminated in the first round by Lilo and Stitch. Lilo and Stitch won round 2, and it won round 3. But it lost in round 4 to The Lion King. The Lion King won round 5, so we put a 1 there. But it lost in the final round, so we put a 0. So Bolt's performance score is 26. Now there are a couple things that I want to point out about the scoring system. First of all, it heavily weights 1s in the earlier rounds. So films that have a score of 1 in these early rounds are going to rank higher than films that have 0s. That makes sense. 1s in early rounds means it made it further in the tournament, whereas 0s in early rounds indicates early elimination. And the other thing I want to point out is that no 2 films in this tournament have the exact same path. That means that none of them are going to have the exact same score, which means that we don't have to worry about ties. If we take any 2 films in the tournament, we can definitively determine which one did better, and therefore our rankings are final and solid. Cool. So with all that being said, I went through all 58 movies and ranked them, scored them using this system. And the results are as follows. So, as you can see, the number 1 rank was The Emperor's New Groove, number 2 was Lion King, number 3 was Aladdin, and number 4 was Fantasia. Obviously, this makes sense. These were the final 4 movies, and this was the order in which they finished. If we take a look at 5 through 8, we have Mulan, Lilo and Stitch, Many Adventures, and Cinderella. These 4 movies all made it to the Elite 8, but lost to the Final 4 qualifiers. And the order in which they're ranked directly corresponds to the order of the movies that beat them. So Mulan lost to Emperor's New Groove, Lilo and Stitch lost to Lion King, Many Adventures lost to Aladdin, and Cinderella lost to Fantasia. None of these results should be surprising. The rankings should be fairly intuitive. This is just to show that my scoring system does capture intuition, and we can extrapolate this for the results that do not follow intuition, because there were a lot of movies that got knocked out in the first round, and a lot of different paths following those eliminations. So it might be pretty hard to determine which one actually did the worst. But using this scoring system, we've figured it out. It's going to be the movie that received 0s across the board. The movie that lost in round 1, the film that knocked it out, losing in round 2, the film knocking that one out, losing in round 3, and so on. And so, to answer the question that you've been asking for a while, which movie did the worst in Mouse Madness? Well, by my objectively great scoring system, the worst performing movie in the tournament was Winnie the Pooh, specifically the 2011 version. We can go back to the bracket to verify this directly. Winnie the Pooh lost in round 1 to The Fox and the Hound. Fox and the Hound lost in round 2 to Dumbo. Dumbo lost in round 3 to Cinderella. Cinderella lost in round 4 to Fantasia. And if we go to the Final Four, we can see that Fantasia lost the semifinal to The Emperor's New Groove and was therefore relegated to the battle for third, which it lost to Aladdin. So starting with Winnie the Pooh 2011, every step in the tournament results in a loss, and that's why it's the worst performing movie. Ralph Breaks the Internet came in as second worst. It followed the same path as Winnie the Pooh, except it ended at Aladdin, which won the battle for third. Alright, so one last thing that I want to talk about is expected performance. I decided to rank the movies based on their expected performance. And what I mean by expected performance is the expectation that the higher seeds are always going to win. So what I have here is a very bare template. These numbers represent the seeds. It's the same template that I used for the actual tournament, but each outcome has the higher seed winning. Now you might be thinking, well, wouldn't the lowest overall seed be the absolute worst? Well, no, because the lowest overall seed was a 15 seed. The 15 seed would lose to the 2 seed, but the 2 seed would win in rounds 2 and 3. So it would get more points than, say, an 11 seed, which loses in the first round to seed 6, which loses in the second round to seed 3. I went through the initial bracket, and I ranked these movies based on where they were expected to finish given these assumptions. And the expected performance chart can be found here. So naturally, the best performing movies were the 1 seeds. They're expected to win all the time, and 1A would be the overall champion because the class is determined on overall seeding. So given this, the film that was actually expected to perform the worst is Frozen 2, the 11 seed from Class D. If we go to this expected template, we can see that 11 is expected to lose to 6, 6 is expected to lose to 3, 3 would lose to 2, and 2 would lose to 1. And because this is Class D, this 1 seed would be expected to perform the worst in the Final Four. So yeah, 11D has the worst expected performance, and that movie corresponds to Frozen 2. I decided to compare the expected rank to the actual rank. O rank being observed, E rank being expected. E minus O is the expected rank minus the observed rank. Positive values indicate how much better in the tournament they did than expected. Negative values indicate how much worse they did. So, if we rank these from highest to lowest, here's what we find. The Emperor's New Groove did 42 spots higher than it was expected to. It was expected to finish 43rd in performance, but instead finished first. Notice that the next two have 29 and 25, and these movies are Fantasia 2000 and Treasure Planet. These movies were the 12 seeds that made it past the first round. Because they were seeded so low and attached to 5 seeds, they were expected to rank way, way at the bottom. But they didn't. They made it past the first round, and that increased their score by at least 32. On the flip side, we can see Three Caballeros and Lady and the Tramp, the 5 seeds that lost in round 1, have some of the worst E-O ratings. We can see that Winnie the Pooh has the absolute worst. It was a higher seed. It was expected to make it to at least the second round, but it didn't, so that really hurt its score. The fact that it was the worst performing movie overall didn't make things any better. So instead of finishing 23rd where it was expected to, it finished in 58th. Now, Beauty and the Beast was expected to be the overall champion, but instead, it came in at number 17. Because it lost in the very first matchup in round 2, but it lost to The Emperor's New Groove, which ended up being the grand champion. So of all the movies that got knocked out in round 2, Beauty and the Beast technically did the best. And that's pretty much all I have to say about these stats. Thank you all for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed the tournament.